Dave Rubin is still on quite the character arc. Everybody knows his story. He started out as like a TYT host and was a left-leaning guy, and then slowly but surely he had this political transformation where he went from left-leaning guy to like classical liberal, as in I view myself as moderate, and then it was like classical liberal and I'm just going to be a conservative, and now it's like he's the most standard doctrinaire, down the line, reflexive, reactionary, unthoughtful Republican. That's what he is. So now he's taking shots. This is a thing with Dave Rubin. It happens all the time. Like he'll get close with somebody, or he'll try to get close with somebody, and then like the tiniest thing that he views as a slight, and he goes nuclear. And really difficult guy, to deal with behind the scenes. I knew him and was friendly with him for quite a while. It was weird in the aftermath, for sure. But other people have told stories too. Like, I believe I've heard Chris Rogan tell this story about how, like, the most mild critique of Rubin imaginable, and then, like, Rubin would reach out through back channels to, like, pressure other people about Chris Rogan. He was like, what? Like, he tried to reach out to his podcast host buddy or something and, like, say, like, look at what this guy's doing. Like, almost like trying to find some way to punish him or whatever. He does this really weird Machiavellian back channel, like, high school level petty stuff. Well, now he's going after the big dog. Who's the big dog? Joe Rogan. Big man on campus, #1 podcast in the world. Rubin had been on it a few times. He hasn't been on it in quite a while. Let's see what he had to say.
Look at it this way. When you see all of these people now supposedly moving from California, they can't take it anymore. They're moving from California to Texas. Well, often we know they export from California and then import it into the red states, all of these blue ideas and these bad ideas, and then they turn states blue. So, if I was the average Texan conservative, I would be pretty worried when, say, Joe Rogan, I like Joe, but when Joe Rogan, who was a Bernie supporter, he's fleeing California to set up shop in Texas, right. And you're excited because it's kind of cool that Joe Rogan lives there, but it's like, he's gotten the big ideas wrong, and you have to be worried about that. That's not a shot at Joe Rogan personally, but that's just a reality.
I like how he slips in at the end. But that's not a shot at Joe Rogan personally, it's just the reality. To this point, he hasn't said anything negative about Joe. Now he is. Why? Because it became clear to him that Joe ain't ever having him back on his podcast. That's donezo, son. That ship has sailed. Now, why isn't Joe having him back on the podcast? Listen, all of this stuff is public. You don't have to take my word for it. You can see the record. You can see it unfold. But there were a few times in podcasts where Joe Rogan would say these things where it was kind of clear he was talking about Dave Rubin, even though he's too nice of a guy and he wouldn't say it. But, he argued, man, I like having people on from across the ideological spectrum. Listen, he's friends with me, and he's friends with Ben Shapiro. How is that possible when Ben and I disagree on 98% of stuff? Because Joe is a very curious guy, and as long as he feels like somebody's telling the truth, he wants to hear him out. As long as he feels like somebody's not a grifter, he'll hear him out. Well, he's on to Dave Rubin, and it became clear that Joe thinks Dave Rubin is a grifter and an airhead. And so there were a few times in various podcasts where he would make this argument, like, as long as I think you're telling the truth, I'll have you on. If I think you're a grifter, that's when I got to cut you off. And it was so clear he was referring to Rubin without actually saying Rubin's name. And this happened a number of times. There was this famous argument back and forth that Rubin and Rogan had on their last podcast that they did. And it became clear that Rubin really was not playing with a full deck in that conversation. The debate was on, like, regulations, and Joe was like, listen, man, I worked construction. You can't tell me that these guys wouldn't cut corners. They absolutely cut corners, and you need the regulations to make sure that they don't. You can't have a water line close to, the electric, and it's just, it's insane to not have regulation. We need regulation to prevent a lot of damage from being done. And Rubin was in a corner and he's basically like, Joe, I think that, ideologically, it's not that. What I'm trying to say is that I really like that idea in theory of deregulation. In theory, intellectually, that's the thing that makes sense to me. And Joe's like, he's got this look on his face like, what are you talking about? Then there was this famous moment where they were talking about the United States Postal Service, and Rubin says basically how bad of a job they do and that it should be totally privatized. And then he accidentally makes the argument the United States Postal Service is actually awesome because they delivered like live animals to him or something like that. But I guess he messed up and thought United States Postal Service was UPS, not USPS. And so he ended up giving credit to the government while making a point that government sucks. And everybody on the internet was like, oh my God, you're the dumbest person on the planet. Oh my God. So anyway, it looks like Joe Rogan really caught on that this guy is not playing with a full deck. He's not all there. He's an airhead. He's also just looking for an angle. I think I've told this story publicly before, but I'll never forget. The only person in this business, right, the political commentary business or whatever you want to call it, the only person in this business who I had a conversation with where I really thought, like, that was a weird thing to say, it was with Dave Rubin, because Dave Rubin one time said to me, what's your end goal? What's your end game? TV show? And I thought, like, I like doing what I'm doing for the sake of doing it. Like, I'm not trying to get from point A to point B personally. I'm doing what I want to do and what I like to do. I'm talking about all these important issues, and that's what it's about. It's about following the news, talking about what I find interesting and what I think is very important, and sharing that with all you, and running my mouth and giving my opinion. That's what it's about. But I like it for what it is. I'm not trying to get somewhere like, oh, I'm miserable now, but maybe I'll get to this place where then I can be happy and I've made it. I never thought like that. That's careerist garbage. But Dave Rubin asked the question, expecting me to be like, yeah, the ultimate goal is a TV show, Dave. Yes, what's yours? And that's when I had my first reservations of like, oh, okay, so this guy's he's always scheming, plotting, trying to get ahead, trying to play the game, trying to get somewhere. It's never about what you're doing right now. Feeling that there's value in what you're doing right now. It's always got to be some sort of official recognition from some of the higher-ups, whether it's a big network or the other people who are more famous than you. This is, again, a big theme with Dave Rubin. So Rogan caught on to the fact that this guy's not a guy that he would get along with or like. And then the next thing that came out was Dave Rubin was talking to his audience doing a Q&A, and he said, hey, listen, we've been reaching out to Rogan nonstop to try to get on to promote Dave's new book, which, by the way, is terrible. There are conservative outlets that did reviews of the book that were like, this is incoherent garbage, and I hate it, and it makes conservatives look bad. Conservative outlets are saying that. So Rubin was trying to get on Rogan to sell his new book, and Rogan clearly wasn't having it. And so Rubin was doing a Q&A with his audience, and he says, hey, I don't know what happened. Try to get on. We've reached out nonstop. I don't know what's going on. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. You know what's going on. He sees through you now. And you're butthurt that he sees through you. So anyway, fast forward now, I guess, a few weeks. And now here comes the shots. Here comes the shots from Dave. And I don't think they're going to stop. I think they'll continue. Unless he realizes, hey, I shouldn't go after the number one podcast host in America because he could bury me if he really wanted to, and he could call me out by name, and that would destroy me. So maybe he will back off of that, because if there's anything he respects, it's power. But maybe not. Maybe he won't back off, because he's clearly butthurt over this. He is. It's clear that he's upset. And so now he's taking the shots at Rogan, trying to act like it's not coming from a place of personal grief, but it is. I mean, because nobody could be this stupid for real, right? Where he says, it's kind of bad that Rogan is bringing these big ideas and these bad ideas to Texas. So the guy whose whole thing is like, who, me, bro? I'm all about freedom of speech. I'm all about free speech. and I hate the snowflakes, and I love freedom, unless it's freedom to move wherever you want to move if you're an American. It sounds to me, Dave, like you're canceling Joe Rogan for disagreeing with you. That's what it sounds like to me. Hey, don't move from a liberal state to a conservative state because I, Dave Rubin, disagree with you and don't want you to import bad ideas. So in other words, you're not so big on that whole freedom thing. Here's my take as a lefty. Any American can move anywhere the hell they want to because that's freedom, and that's being an American. Now, I know Dave is ruthlessly, rigidly, pathetically partisan these days, but that's what normal Americans would agree to. You can go wherever you want. Should we have a checklist, Dave? Hey, what are your thoughts on abortion? What are your thoughts on the size of the government? What are your thoughts on taxes? Sorry, you can move in here, you can't move in here. Sounds like the opposite of freedom to me. The funny thing is his whole brand was built on well, I care a lot about ideological diversity, and that's what the intellectual dark web is about. If you disagree with somebody, you're still supposed to hear them out. That's the way this works. And then now it's like, Rogan disagrees with me. He shouldn't be able to move where he wants to move. He's canceled. He's canceled for not agreeing with me. And then my favorite part is, he got the big ideas wrong. Oh, did he? Please elaborate, son. I'd love to hear this. Dave, please explain to me what big ideas Joe Rogan has gotten wrong. I'll wait. Because the fact of the matter is, if we get into the specifics, he can't defend any of it. It's like when Rubin went on David Pakman's show, and David Pakman, basic questions, the most basic questions of all time on healthcare policy. And Rubin had no idea how to answer it. He was totally lost. Pakman was like, what's your ideal system? And Rubin talked word salad, right? And then Pakman asked another question. Dave responded, and Pakman goes, wait a second. You bash Obamacare. What you just described was Obamacare. Because previously, he had said, oh, he's for Medicare for all. He's for, universal health care. This is what Rubin had said previously. Then he backed off of that. And he said, well, what we should have is everybody should have coverage, but they should have coverage through the private market. And Pakman's like, dude, that's basically Obamacare. It's an individual mandate system. It's saying, hey, we'll expand Medicaid, but if you don't have healthcare, you have to get healthcare, and you got to go get it through the private market if you don't fit the income threshold for Medicaid. So he's bashing Obamacare out of one side of his mouth. Out of the other side of his mouth, he's basically saying Obamacare is my ideal type of healthcare reform. At least getting the basics right. That's the idea he likes. Fraud. Can I say it any clearer? Doesn't believe in anything. He's in over his head, too. He's in over his head, for sure. So, anyway, go ahead, man. Keep taking shots at the number one podcast host in America. Because guess what? At some point, Dave, he's not going to be so nice anymore. I can't wait for that day if it comes. There's going to be some day where he sees some dumb pot shot you took at him, and he's like, you know what, son? Gloves are off. Because Joe Rogan really is the nicest guy in the world. He really is. I mean, what you see on air is exactly what he's like off air. Sweetest guy, genuinely likes people, genuinely has friends from across the political spectrum. But there are lines. And he's been damn kind to Dave Rubin to this point, not calling him out by name and saying, you know what, you're full of it. And I think you're a fraud, and I think you're a grifter. And nobody should take you seriously. There might come a day where he snaps and he says something like that if you keep taking your pot shots there, Dave. So, please proceed.